Look, thank you again, Lara and Zaha. I think you've probably been well briefed. Obviously there's the work of CARBU, which has been, really instrumental for many of us as parliamentarians and others in our links and our understanding and keeping up to date with what's going on in the Middle East, and particularly in relation to Israel, Palestine. And in addition to that, we've had for, I think it's probably the last year or so, just over a year, a network of cross-party parliamentarians that, once a month are able to just get together, it's now an hour Zoom, and think about how can we be working together, and also what issues do we think are important to try and put on the parliamentary agenda. Both of you, thank you very much. Most welcome to join us. And Lara, if we could hear from you first, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting us. And it's always a pleasure and an honor to speak on the same panel as Zaha, who is brilliant. I recognize some of the faces in the crowd. It's great to have you all here. I'm gonna speak sort of in general, this first part, because I think you know a lot. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on.
Sorry, if everybody could just put themselves on mute. Everyone just double check their audio. And perhaps the host, if the host could also, I think Joseph, you're able to check if people are on. That's brilliant. Thank you, Lara. Sorry about that.
No worries. This technology is always it's always an adventure. So just as some background, as we look towards a future where we imagine that we have a new U.S. administration, and of course that's very much still in question, so we'll have to see, but we're going to do this analysis based on the assumption that Biden does win. So I think a few things you can take for granted if Biden wins. I'll first say it's a return to non-ideological foreign policy making, and this is not a small thing. For those of us who follow foreign policy, I've spent the past, until COVID, 3 years traveling off into Europe and consistently getting into the strangest conversations with people where I'd say, well, this is what they say they're going to do, and this is what I see, and they say, I get the answer, well, they'll never do that, and they haven't done it yet, and it's like nobody was ready to take them seriously, because what the Trump administration talked about, the way it talked, and the things it said it would do seemed irrational, and the fact is, the policy was always rational from an ideological perspective, and that made it difficult for people who analyze and anticipate and plan foreign policy to ever understand and predict accurately, which is why most people got them wrong. I think if a Biden administration comes in, you will see a return to what is rational foreign policy making. And that includes concerns about, first, second, third order effects of US decisions, including on our alliances and our allies and our relations in the world and international institutions and our standing, all of that. And we can go into later what sort of opportunity that presents or may present for allies in Europe looking at the US and seeing where they may have a more an opportunity for a more effective role, a more influential role, or any role at all, which they don't have right now. So that's important. I'm trying to hit the positive a little bit first. In addition, just looking at the US scene, you will have a receding of influence immediately of the hardline evangelicals and the greater Israel allies, Jewish and non-Jewish, who are seen by the Trump administration as a core constituency to be catered to. They make up all of the officials who are running the policy on Israel-Palestine, and obviously those are the key donors that this president caters to. And this is apart from the conversation of whether Mr. Trump cares at all about Israel-Palestine. It doesn't matter. He cares about his constituents. He cares about a core group of people who he trusts and allows to have the reins of power. And those people, whether you're talking about, David Friedman and his son-in-law, or you're talking about Sheldon Adelson, or you're talking about the messianic Jewish members of his circle like Jay Sekulow, or you're looking out to the funders like Adelson and the Christian evangelical leaders like Reverend Hagee. So immediately that will recede. Those are not people who have necessarily any influence at all with the Biden administration, which can only be a healthy change in US policy, I would argue. The fact is that Mr. Biden is a well-known quantity on Israel-Palestine, and he is surrounded by people from the Obama era, those people mainly surrounding him, and I think Zaha can talk to that more, who are known quantities. And generally, they do clearly lean very much more towards Israel, and we can talk about what the implications of that are, but they're not single-minded ideological zealots. So that's very positive. In addition, a Biden administration will come into office, if they win, with a grassroots that has shifted. We now have poll after poll demonstrating that the grassroots of Democratic voters are more progressive than the Democratic leadership and the Democratic Party. Whether we are talking about questions on conditioning aid or being even-handed on Israel-Palestine or defending or even supporting BDS, the grassroots is far more progressive. And that does start to impose some limits on how far a leadership can go, or how much they have to at least make an effort to appear to be concerned with the grassroots and what their concerns are. We'll see this in the House, where the Democratic caucus, already the Democratic caucus is becoming more progressive year on year. In the House, this next Congress, the next House, will have a larger pool of people in it who are openly concerned with Israel-Palestine in a way that has been inconceivable in the past, and it goes beyond the squad. We're getting a bigger group, and as that group gets bigger, I think it will strengthen the spines of those who may already be in Congress but haven't had the courage to be more outspoken in their views. And I say that as someone who has spent years meeting with people on the Hill who, you know, you close the door and the member of Congress says, wow, I totally agree with you on settlements and all that, but I can't say this publicly, I'll get destroyed. So the spine stiffening, I think, is not an insignificant point. And we're going to get to a point next year in the next House where the Democratic caucus, the majority of the Democratic caucus will be the progressives. The mainline old school Democrats are actually being outnumbered now by the progressives in the caucus. And in particular, you're seeing the end of the old guard, the old guard on Israel-Palestine. So when Eliot Engel, who is the powerful chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is unseated by an absolute progressive, when Nita Lowey, who is the chair of the House the House Appropriations Middle East Subcommittee, when she retires, and you know, neither of them are going to be replaced in their seats on those powerful committees by the brand new progressive that replaced them, but they are being replaced in Congress by people who are far more progressive, and their seats in those committees are very likely to go to people who are more progressive than they were. So these are real changes, and it's just fascinating. Very quickly on Biden, and then I'll stop. So with Biden, what to expect on Israel-Palestine, I think the starting point is we listen to them. And we know Biden, we know him from the Obama era. He is clearly more conservative on Israel-Palestine than Obama was. We know that from the experience of people who were in the Obama administration. But by and large, he is a status quo, support two states, don't clash with Israel, defend US aid to Israel. We've seen that, and that's what they've put out repeatedly in statements. It's what's in the Democratic National Platform. It's really what you would expect. What is in competition with that, though, is he is going to be coming into office trying to shift gears from where Trump has taken things, trying to pivot. And the question really becomes then, how can he pivot and how much will he want to pivot? Oh, and also how much political capital will he be willing to invest? So, you know, the sort of conservative scenario is they come into office and pursue what I call status quo ante minus, which is, I think, the sort of baseline the default, which is they come in and they say, everyone could agree, fairly bipartisan, that where Obama came in, not the Obama administration policy, but where things were when he came in, you support two states, don't clash too much with Israel, protect Israel at the UN, control aid, all that stuff. You protect that, and that's return to a comfortable status quo, wrap yourself in the comfortable blanket of we support two states. And the minus is there are things that Trump did that cannot be rolled back easily, like moving the embassy, for example. Or some of them can't be rolled back easily because there's been changes in US law, like restarting aid. So the Biden folks talk about wanting to restart aid. There are limits on what they can do because of law that was passed bipartisan by Congress, which are going to challenge their ability to do that. By the same token, I mean, I do not lose hope that we may see some creativity. And if a Biden administration wants to come in and say, we are here to create new opportunities for peace, this is as pessimistic as I am in general, because I am pretty pessimistic, I leave open the possibility that a new administration pivoting, changing course, there are things they can do. And I know that there's a lot of energy being spent brainstorming things that they can do, things that would allow them, for instance, to reopen the PLO mission, or potentially open some sort of diplomatic outreach to the Palestinians on the ground. Some of that's going to depend on the Palestinians. And there's interesting analysis out there. Daoud Khattab had a piece a couple of days ago that after the election, if Biden wins, we may see some sort of shift in policy and initiative from the Palestinians to show readiness, which is interesting to watch. What I worry about, and this is the last thing I'll say, when we talk about status quo ante minus, during the Obama era, one of the arguments that was made often by people outside the administration and people who had been in and then went out, like Dennis Ross and David Makovsky, was that Obama's policy on Israel-Palestine failed because he clashed unnecessarily and non-constructively with Israel, and that the best way forward is to avoid those fights. And the beginning of avoiding those fights means changing US policy on settlements to not clash with Israel in every settlement announcement. This was written up in op-eds in the New York Times. It was written, even some of the more progressive analysts wrote papers, wrote articles about this. I think this is going to be very, very tempting for for a Biden administration to try to come up with some formula which says, okay, we're not gonna come out and fight with you every time you approve settlements. And that is an extremely worrying position if that's where they go, particularly, I mean, if I said this last week, you could have accused me maybe of being paranoid and engaging in hyperbole when I say it's dangerous. Okay, this week, the Israeli government approved for advancement 5,000 settlement units, making 2020 the highest year since 2012 for settlement advancements. This is clearly the alternative to officially declaring annexation, right? You don't declare official annexation, but you go full steam ahead on de facto annexation. And this is where I think the role of international partners and allies in not allowing a new administration to think the easy way out is to change US policy on settlements, when Europe cares about international law and all that. I think that role is going to be more important than ever, and potentially can have more influence than people might otherwise think. And I will stop there, and you can answer things and questions. Zaha?
Thank you very much, Lara.
Sorry.
So hand over to Zaha. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for inviting me. Like Lara said, it really is an honor to address you and to know that there is a caucus like this that exists, that is concerned and thinks it's important to be working on Israel-Palestine peace. From my remarks, you'll know that this is in particular an issue now, because I do think Palestine-Israel is falling down in the priorities of any U.S. administration, or at least Israel-Palestine peace is falling as a priority. So it's good to know that there are caucuses like this out there working on the issue. You know, Lara did a great job. I could just stop by saying I put my stamp on everything she said in terms of looking at it from the 10,000 foot level of, what's the landscape here in the U.S. So, I'll try to go on in a more sort of fine-tuned view of where a Biden administration would go. She's absolutely right. The policy differences aren't huge. I mean, a Biden administration is going to be very Israel-centered. Palestine and Palestinians are an appendage of that relationship because it complicates that relationship, and not as a U.S. bilateral relationship on its own. And so that's going to continue. What the big differences are going to be more in terms of what Lara said, and in a Biden administration's focus on multilateralism, on international law, and these kinds of things. How that gets translated into policy is going to be difficult given the Biden administration's foreign policy outlook, and given what it has said it wants to do on Israel-Palestine. So, the U.S., like the rest of the world, is preoccupied with COVID-19 response, is going to be preoccupied moving forward with, the economic fallout of that. We are really interested in healthcare reform in the US, and a Biden administration has promised to engage on that, and also social and racial inequality. We have all of these high on the priority list, as well as what a Biden administration or his campaign has said they're interested in doing, which is in rebuilding and reimagining multilateralism to confront some of the transnational challenges that the US is facing along with the rest of the world. And so if you're thinking about issues like big tech and big data and artificial intelligence and climate change and global competition from China, you know, Palestine, Israel is very low on the list. And so what you're going to see is a Biden administration that tries to, you know, stay out of the Israel-Palestine game. It hasn't paid off for any president in the past. The likelihood that he's going to make a big breakthrough on Israel-Palestine is very small. So why expend the political capital to try to do that? So it's going to be more along the lines of conflict management, and also keeping it enough outside of the agenda so that it doesn't complicate relations with other countries, with rebuilding those multilateral institutions that a Biden administration is going to want to do. This is not, there isn't a consensus on how to treat Palestine. The US has kind of moved away from international legal parameters and is looking more at you know, solutions that aren't confined by international law, so to speak. So to try to make Israel-Palestine conflict resolution a priority in its effort to reimagine and rebuild multilateral mechanisms is not going to be, is going to be problematic. So keeping it off to the side and managing conflict is probably what we're going to see from a Biden administration. So what does that mean for Palestinians? It means you don't expect any great initiatives or a lot of energy and resources expended towards relaunching peace talks. I mean, you're going to hear, and we have heard that a Biden, you know, the Biden campaign is, you know, talks about supporting a two-state solution, as Lara said. But the language has shifted a little bit. It's not, you know, a sovereign, contiguous Palestinian state anymore. It's, excuse me, it's a viable state of Palestine. And, you know, that, and you know, predicated on mutual recognition for any relaunch of talks. And again, mutual recognition for Palestinians has meant recognizing Israel as a Jewish state and a homeland of the Jewish people, even before Israel declares its borders. So that's going to stay, you know, that's going to be something that is part of a Biden administration moving forward. This continuing, as Laura said, cloaking yourself in a two-state solution without any prospect of a two-state solution coming into being. There's the Biden administration will oppose, they say, annexation, de jure annexation and settlement expansion, but we don't know what that will actually look like in terms of policy, because we know that there is not going to be any conditioning of aid to Israel to prevent that. So how a Biden administration would oppose settlement construction and de jure annexation is unclear. Similarly, on, you know, there's been a lot of talk about restarting economic aid to Palestinians. Trump has put a hold on all aid to, you know, any aid that was going to go into Palestine has been put on hold, presidential holds. But you know, the Biden team has said that economic aid will be restarted consistent with U.S. law. Well, consistent with U.S. law, as Laura said, means you know, very little aid, if any, will be getting through. So there's a lot of tension between what is being proposed, but the actual possibility that it can be executed it's hard to see that. It's hard to see aid being restarted as it had been, you know, prior to a Trump administration. Also on Gaza, talk of allowing more movement and access and lifting restrictions, not necessarily lifting the blockade itself. And as Lara said, opening up the, reopening the consulate in East Jerusalem, or reopening a PLO mission, all of which are also complicated by US laws. So the extent to which any of these things on a Biden a Biden team wish list can actually be executed, or whether or not there's going to be the political will to execute on them is hard to see right now. With respect to Israel and you know, how a Biden administration would approach Israel, you know, there's a commitment to oppose and reject boycott, divestment, and sanctions, though that's tempered by the idea that a Biden administration would not support anything that restricts free speech. Again, there's that tension coming back to play, you know, on a policy statement, but then qualifying it so that it makes it unclear how you can possibly reconcile those two. Biden also, like Trump, is interested in taking bold action. This is a quote: bold action towards normalization with the Arab world and the Muslim world. What does that mean for a Biden administration? It's very unclear. If the UAE Israel normalization deal put the campaign in an interesting place of having to support that, because that is part of the Biden platform. But at the same time, there's these weapons transfers that came along with or hope for weapons transfers that came along with these agreements. And so would a Biden administration support continuing commercial sales to the Middle East as a part of an effort to encourage Arab normalization, at the same time that a Biden administration would continue to support a qualitative military edge for Israel, which, you know, raises the questions of like how much more weapons can the Middle East handle at this point, given all the instability and the conflicts that are still ongoing there, and to what extent is the U.S. going to be able to support human rights and democratic governance for the peoples in the Middle East when it continues to support, you know, weapon sales and weapons grants to the Middle East. So these are some of the tensions that a Biden administration is going to hit up against, given sort of the more loftier goals that they have with respect to, you know, shifting back to some of the good old day policies of a Obama administration, but running up against sort of this changed environment in 2021 that it's going to inherit. And one other thing is that, you know, that a Biden campaign has talked about, which is, you know, re-engaging in international fora for the purpose of, you know, rebuilding relationships and also supporting multilateralism, but also they state is to, you know, to help Israel, to protect Israel from bias that it sees coming out of, you know, different UN mechanisms. So that's, you know, that's again another point of tension out of the Biden administration that's going to have to be resolved once and if you know, Biden and Harris take office in January. And I'll just stop there.